You found this at 3 a.m. for a reason. Carl Jung. Carl Jung observed that the psyche does not wait for daylight to make its case, and that the hours we call empty are often the hours it chooses to speak. Here is where I want to start, plainly, with something Jung wrote in a letter to a woman named Fanny Bowditch in 1916. He wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. And I want you to sit with that for a moment before we go any further. Because you are awake right now, in a way that has nothing to do with the clock. Something in you would not let this be an ordinary scroll past an ordinary video. Something stopped your thumb, and Jung would tell you that this stopping is not proof of destiny. And it is not proof of nothing either. It sits in the harder, more honest place between those two. The place where an inner state and an outer event meet at a threshold neither one built alone. You did not manufacture this moment, and you did not simply stumble into it by pure accident. Both of those stories are too easy, and the true one asks more of you. So before we go further, let me give you 3 lines to say, not as a spell, not as a wish thrown into the dark, but as a plain accounting of where you actually stand tonight. I stop assuming this hour found me by accident, and I also stop assuming it found me for some grand reason I am owed an explanation of. I let the question stay open without needing to close it tonight. I make the unconscious conscious. Say it with me. I stop assuming this hour found me by accident, and I also stop assuming it found me for some grand reason I am owed an explanation of. I let the question stay open without needing to close it tonight. I make the unconscious conscious. Again, I stop assuming this hour found me by accident, and I also stop assuming it found me for some grand reason I am owed an explanation of. I let the question stay open without needing to close it tonight. I make the unconscious conscious. And if you want tomorrow's teaching to find you as easily as this one did, the simplest thing you can do is subscribe, so it is waiting for you instead of the other way around. Before we go on, type 2 words in the comments. Just 2. Face it. Let it be the smallest honest thing you do tonight. They a little seal on this hour, so we both know you were really here and not just passing through. The first key is, the reason is real, but it is not the reason you are hoping for. And I want to be careful with you here, because this is the part where most teaching on this subject goes soft and starts promising you a universe that is personally arranging your bedtime scrolling. Jung never taught that. What Jung called synchronicity was something narrower and, honestly, more respectful of you than that. He called it a meaningful coincidence between an inner condition and an outer event, one that cannot be explained by cause and effect, but is not therefore meaningless. He was careful his whole life to keep this idea small enough to be true. He did not publish his full essay on it until he was in his 70s, working alongside the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, because he did not want it mistaken for magic. So here is the plain version. Something in you has been unsettled for a while now, some question you have been carrying without quite naming it. And tonight, at 3 in the morning, that unsettled thing met an outer event. This video, this title, and the meeting felt charged, not because the algorithm is fate, but because you were already primed to notice it. Imagine, for a moment, a smaller version of this same mechanism. Imagine a man who has been quietly worried about his health for weeks, without saying so out loud to anyone, not even to himself in plain words. And then one ordinary afternoon he turns on the radio in his car, and the program happens to be about that very illness. He feels a jolt. He thinks, why this? Why now? And the honest answer is that the program was probably playing at that hour every single day. What changed was not the world arranging itself around him. What changed was that his own attention, sharpened by weeks of quiet worry, finally had something to catch on. The coincidence did not create the worry. The worry created the conditions under which the coincidence could be noticed at all. This is exactly your situation tonight. The video did not manufacture the ache you are carrying. The ache has been there, doing its slow work under the surface, and tonight it simply found a surface to rise against. So when I say the reason is real, I mean this. Your inner state is real. It has weight. It has been gathering for longer than tonight, and when I say it is not the reason you were hoping for, I mean that no outside force reached down and placed this video in your path, like a hand placing a card on a table. The meeting was real, the placing was not. That is the whole of the distinction, and it is not a smaller story than the one you wanted. It is a truer one. It is not magic. It is recognition. And recognition, unlike magic, is something you can actually work with tomorrow morning. It is not magic. It is recognition. And recognition is worth more. The second key is, two things had to meet for this to happen, not one. And this is where I want you to think back over your actual day, not in the abstract but hour by hour, because Jung would insist on this kind of plain accounting. Imagine an ordinary Tuesday. You wake, you go through your errands, you answer messages you do not really want to answer, you carry a low hum of some unresolved question, all day without stopping to name it. Maybe it is about a job, maybe about someone you love who has gone quiet, maybe just a general sense that your life has drifted from something it once pointed toward. That hum is the first half of the meeting. It is what Jung would call a constellated inner state, a psychic charge building without a clear outlet. Now walk it further with me, because the hum rarely announces itself plainly. It hides inside smaller frictions. You snapped at someone in traffic over nothing. You reread the same paragraph of an email 4 times without taking in a word of it. You reached for your phone 11 separate times before dinner, looking for something you could not name. None of that is random static. Jung would say, each small friction is the charge leaking sideways, looking for a door, and all day the doors were blocked. Work blocked it, noise blocked it. The small kindnesses and small irritations of an ordinary life blocked it. So the charge simply waited, patient in the way pressure is always patient, building without asking your permission, and without announcing when it would finally find its opening. And then night comes, the house goes quiet. The usual noise that drowns out the hum during the day is gone. The traffic stops, the messages stop, the small performances stop, and somewhere in that quiet you land here. That is the second half, the outer event arriving at the exact moment the inner charge has nowhere else to go. Think of it almost like 2 rivers that have been running for miles on opposite sides of a ridge, unaware of each other, cutting their own paths, and only at one particular low point in the land do they finally meet and become a single current. The meeting was not decided upstream, it was simply where the land finally let them join. Jung's point was that this pairing is rare enough to matter, and common enough that everyone eventually meets it. He did not claim the outer event was sent, he claimed the meeting was meaningful, and meaning, for Jung, was never about proof, it was about what the moment does inside you. Does it settle something? Does it name something? Does it give the hum a shape it did not have at noon? If it does, that is the coincidence doing its quiet work, and you do not need to explain how it happened to let it matter. You do not need an outside intelligence arranging your evening. You need only notice that the pressure of the day and the arrival of this hour were never 2 unrelated facts. They were the same river, arriving from 2 directions, finally allowed to become one. The third key is, the most famous example of this in Jung's own practice was smaller and stranger than most people expect. Jung once treated a woman whose rationalism was so complete, so airtight, that he wrote he could make no headway with her at all. She had built her entire inner life out of explanations. Every dream she folded neatly back into some tidy daytime cause. Every feeling she filed away before it could ask anything of her, session after session. Jung sat across from a mind that had armored itself so well against mystery that even grief came out sounding like a report. And then one afternoon, she told him a dream. She had dreamed of being given a piece of jewelry shaped like a golden scarab, the sacred beetle of old Egyptian symbol, an image of rebirth she had no personal use for and no ready explanation of. And while she was describing it to him, Jung heard a gentle, insistent tapping at the window behind him. He turned, opened it, and a real insect flew into the room of its own accord. A scarabaeid beetle, a rose chafer, About as close to the dream image as the natural world offers in that part of Switzerland, he caught it gently in his hand, turned back around, and said to her, "Here is your scarab," and something in her rigid structure cracked open right there. Not with fireworks, not with tears even, just a visible, quiet give, like a held breath finally let out. Now consider what did not happen in that room. Jung did not tell her the universe had sent the beetle to prove she was loved, or chosen, or watched over. He was almost fussy about refusing that reading. What he said instead, years later, writing carefully about it, was that certain moments sit at what he called the discontinuities of physics, the seams, where our tidy chain of cause and effect simply runs out of explaining power, not because the world has gone magical, but because some events resist being filed under either pure chance or pure design, and sit instead in a third place that the rational mind, left to itself, has no drawer for. That third place is where her wall finally gave, not because the beetle proved anything, but because for one moment the explaining machine in her had nothing to explain with, and in that gap, something older and quieter got through. Think for a moment about the modern version of that same rigidity. Imagine a man who has spent years managing every feeling the way he manages a spreadsheet, a late night, an unexpected phone call, a headline that echoes something he has been half dreading. He will explain it away by morning. Statistics, coincidence, nothing more. And he is not wrong to reach for that first. Caution is not the enemy here, but there comes a night, maybe this very one, where the explaining stops working fast enough, where something lines up too closely with what he has been quietly circling for weeks, and instead of forcing it back into a drawer, he simply sits with it, unexplained. For once, that sitting is the whole of what happened in Jung's office that afternoon. The woman was not cured by a beetle, she was interrupted by one, and the interruption was enough to let the real work begin. I tell you this story not so you go looking for beetles at your own window, but so you can see the exact shape of what happened to you tonight. Some tired, over-explained, tightly managed part of you met something that did not ask to be explained. It only asked to be noticed. And noticing, Jung would say, is the whole of the work at this stage, not solving, not decoding, just letting the wall soften for a moment. You do not have to know what tonight means to let it do what the beetle did in that room, which was nothing dramatic, only a small, real crack in a wall that had been holding too long. I let the coincidence loosen what my explaining could not reach. The fourth key is, and I say this to protect you, not to deflate you, most of what you will be tempted to call a sign this week is simply chance. Jung himself never claimed otherwise. He was, by training and temperament, a scientist first, and he would want you to hold this idea with two hands, not one. On one hand, some coincidences are genuinely meaningful. On the other hand, the great majority of coincidences are exactly what they appear to be. Coincidences, nothing more. The danger is not in noticing meaning. The danger is in needing every small overlap to mean something. Because a mind that needs constant proof of being watched over is a mind avoiding a harder question, which is what to actually do with its life once the sign has passed. Let me give you an ordinary week to test this against. Imagine you wake on a Monday thinking, out of nowhere, of an old friend you have not spoken to in a year. By Wednesday, a song plays in a shop that was playing the last time you saw her. By Friday, her name turns up on a list of people invited to a wedding you are also attending. None of this is nothing. It feels charged. Your chest tightens a little each time it happens, but Jung would ask you a plainer question before he let you call any of it fate. Did the thought of her Monday actually carry weight? Was there an unresolved ache behind it? A conversation you never finished? A forgiveness never asked for? Or was it simply a name surfacing the way names do, unbidden, in a mind that is never as quiet as it seems? If there is no ache underneath it, the coincidences are just the ordinary traffic of a small world. 3 unrelated events your mind has stitched together after the fact. Because that is what minds do. They hunt for pattern even in noise, especially in noise. that hunting is not a flaw. It kept your ancestors alive in tall grass, but it is not evidence of meaning either. So let this key be a small correction. If you see the same number twice in one day, that is probably nothing. If you think of a friend right before they call, that happens often enough by pure probability that it is not evidence of anything mystical. Jung would not have used the language that floats around now, numbers repeating, as messages from beyond. None of that traces back to him. What traces back to him is much quieter, a small number of moments in a long life, where an inner state and an outer event lined up with enough weight that ignoring the alignment would have been its own kind of dishonesty. Learn to tell the difference between noise and signal, not by how it feels in the moment. Feelings lie about intensity all the time, but by whether it actually changes something afterward. The scarab changed the woman's treatment, not just her mood for an evening. And if you go back to that friend from the story, the real test is not how many coincidences pointed toward her. It is whether you actually pick up the phone. Ask that question of tonight too. Has anything actually shifted in you since you found this video? Or did it only feel important for an hour? That is the test worth keeping. Not the tally of overlaps, but the weight of what follows them. Before we go to the fifth key, breathe with me for a second. If this teaching is doing something in you, subscribing costs nothing, and it means tomorrow's key finds you again. I would rather you have the next one than not, so consider staying close. The fifth key is why the hour itself matters, and I want to walk through this slowly, in pieces, because it deserves more than one pass. First, consider what the daylight hours actually do to a mind. They fill it with tasks, with faces, with 100 small performances. Jung would call this the work of the persona, the necessary mask we wear to move through a working day. Useful, even needed, but heavy, and the mask requires upkeep, all day, without you noticing the cost. Every polite reply you did not fully mean, every meeting face you held a little too long, every small swallowing of what you actually felt so the day could keep moving. By 3 in the morning, that upkeep has simply stopped. There is no one left to perform for, no meeting to prepare a face for, no tone of voice to manage. And when the mask goes quiet, what is underneath it gets its first real airtime since the last time you were this tired. This is not mystical. It is closer to what happens to a muscle when you finally stop clenching it. The ache you feel is not new. It was always there. You simply could not feel it under the grip. Second, consider what Jung called the abasement, the natural lowering of the ordinary waking mind's tight control that comes with fatigue. At 3 in the afternoon, your rational mind is at its most alert, guarding its categories, sorting the important from the unimportant with brisk, almost aggressive confidence, filing every stray feeling under a task it can attend to later, which usually means never. At 3 in the morning, that guard is thin, half asleep at its post, and this is precisely why the mind at that hour drifts toward image rather than argument, toward feeling rather than schedule, toward the old unresolved question rather than the day's tidy list of errands. The guard being thin is not a malfunction, and it is not a weakness in you either. It is the hour doing exactly what hours like this have always done for every tired mind in every age, letting something quieter finally get a word in edgewise. Let me make this concrete. Imagine a woman lying awake at this same hour. She has a job she is competent at, and mostly indifferent to, a marriage that functions the way a well-maintained appliance functions. Without complaint and without warmth, during the day none of this troubles her. She is too busy answering emails and picking up groceries and keeping 3 small plates spinning at once. But at 3 in the morning, with the house silent and her husband breathing evenly beside her, a single sentence rises in her mind, unbidden. Is this actually the life I meant to build? She did not summon that sentence. She was not lying there hunting for it. It simply arrived the moment the guard went thin enough to let it through. And here is what matters. That sentence was true at noon as well. It was just inaudible under the noise of the day. The night did not create her doubt. The night only turned down everything that had been drowning it out. This is the plain mechanics of what Jung meant. Nothing more exotic than that, and nothing less important either. Third, consider that this hour is also, historically, the one Jung associated with what he called the Nekia, the night sea journey. An old image, older than psychology itself, of a descent taken not because you are falling apart, but because something in you has decided, without asking your permission first, that it is time to go down and actually look. Jung was careful, almost stubborn, about distinguishing a purposeful descent from an aimless collapse. The difference is not how dark it feels. Both can feel equally dark. Both can feel equally frightening at 3 in the morning. The difference is whether you come back changed, having actually seen something, or simply exhausted, having seen nothing at all and only spent the night circling the same worry without ever once looking straight at it. So the honest question for you tonight is not was I sent here, it is, now that I am here, in this low hour, with the guard down and the mask off, what does the quiet actually want to show me? And I want to say this clearly, because I would rather slow down here than rush past it. If what you are carrying tonight feels less like a question and more like a genuine crisis, if the darkness is heavy in a way that frightens you, if it has teeth, this is a moment for real conversation with people trained to help, not a video that matters more than anything else I say tonight. But if what you are carrying is the ordinary ache of a life quietly asking a question at the 1 hour it can finally get through, then stay with me, because this is exactly the terrain Jung spent his life mapping. Fourth, and this is the turn I want you to actually feel, this is not about people in general finding videos at strange hours. This is about you, specifically. On this specific night, what question has been circling under your ribs for the last several weeks that daylight keeps interrupting before it can finish forming? Name it honestly for a moment, not to me, to yourself. Is it about a relationship that has gone quiet in a way you keep pretending not to notice? Is it about work that has started to feel like a costume you put on each morning? Is it about a version of your life you keep almost stepping toward and then talking yourself out of by lunchtime? Whatever it is, it did not arrive tonight. It has been constellating for weeks, gathering charge the way weather gathers before it finally breaks. And the outer event, this video, this hour, this odd little click of your thumb in the dark, simply gave it a place to land. Fifth, and this is worth sitting with a moment longer, notice that the question did not need the video to exist. It only needed a moment quiet enough to surface, which means the work was never really about the video at all. The video is only the beetle at the window. The actual scarab was already inside you, waiting in the dream you had not yet let yourself have. This landing is the whole of what Jung meant by synchronicity. Not a message written for you by some outside intelligence, but your own inner life, finally finding a mirror, honest enough to reflect it back without flinching. The ache is not evidence that you are broken. It is evidence that something in you is still awake enough, still alive enough, to keep asking. And that, more than any coincidence, more than any strange hour or strange title, is the actual reason you are here. The sixth key is what to actually do with a night like this. And it is smaller and more practical than anything the hour makes it feel like. Jung himself, in his own life, kept something close to a running record, not of every strange overlap, but of the ones that carried real weight. He was, by nature, a keeper of notebooks, a man who trusted the pen more than the passing mood. So here is the version of that practice I would give you. Take a notebook, any notebook, and rule 2 columns. On the left, write down the ordinary coincidences of your week as they happen, the number you keep seeing, the song that plays twice. Most of these belong there and nowhere else. On the right, write down only the ones that changed something afterward. A decision you made differently, a conversation you finally had, a door you walked through instead of past. Imagine a man, ordinary, tired, who tries this for 1 month. In his left column, he fills 3 pages. A stranger wearing his late father's cologne, a license plate with his childhood address, a film quote that seemed to answer a thought he had not spoken aloud, By the second week, he almost gives up the practice. It feels like proof of nothing. And then, near the end of the month, his right column gets its first entry. An old friend, he had not thought of in years, calls him on the one evening he had finally decided, alone, to write her a letter he never sent. He answers the phone. Instead of finishing the letter, that single entry outweighs the 3 pages beside it. Not because it is stranger, but because it moved him. This is the whole discipline, patient, almost dull in its ordinariness, willing to let most of the noise be noise, so that the rare real signal is not drowned out by 100 false ones. Over a month. Look at your own 2 columns honestly. The left one will be long and, mostly, forgettable. The right one will be short, maybe 3 or 4 entries, and those few will be the ones worth trusting. Notice too that the discipline itself does something to you quietly. It slows the reflex to declare everything a message, and it sharpens your eye for the handful of moments that genuinely ask something of you. That sharpening is the real gift of the practice. More than any single answer it gives, I will offer you one hedge, gently, and only once tonight. It is possible, Jung thought, that certain moments in a life do carry a weight beyond ordinary chance. But he never claimed to know which ones in advance, and neither will I. What I will say is this: whatever brought you here tonight, whether it was pure chance, dressed up as meaning, or a real meeting between something in you and something outside you, the only part that is actually yours to do something with is the question that was already circling before you found this video. So let this hour give you not an answer, but permission to finally write the question down in daylight, where you can actually do something about it. Keep the notebook near your bed if you have to, not to chase more signs, but so that when a real one comes, quiet and undramatic the way they almost always are, you will have somewhere honest to put it. Here is the whole picture. The reason is real, but it is not the reason you were hoping for. 2 things had to meet, an inner charge and an outer event. And neither arrived by magic. The scarab did not prove the universe was watching. It proved that a wall can crack when reason finally meets something it cannot file away. Most of what glitters at this hour is only noise. Learn to tell it from signal by whether it actually changes anything after the feeling passes. The hour itself lowers the guard you carry all day and lets the old, quiet question finally get a word in. And last, the practice is not grand. It is a notebook, 2 columns, and patience. They were never 6 separate keys. They were 6 turns of one single recognition. That you did not find this by accident, and you were not summoned by fate either. You were simply, finally, quiet enough to hear something that has been trying to reach you for weeks. So let the ache of this hour be what it actually is. Not a wound and not a sign from beyond, but your own psyche, patient and unglamorous, finally getting a moment without the noise of the day in the way. Jung spent a long life insisting that meaning does not arrive with trumpets. It arrives quietly, in a beetle at a window, in a letter about looking inward, in a video found at an hour that felt, for reasons you may never fully explain, like it mattered. Let that be enough for tonight. You do not need the full explanation before the question is allowed to matter. I stop assuming this hour found me by accident, and I also stop assuming it found me for some grand reason I am owed an explanation of. I let the question stay open without needing to close it tonight. I make the unconscious conscious, and if you found this at 3 in the morning, maybe the only real question worth carrying into tomorrow is not why now, but what have you been circling for weeks that finally got quiet enough to hear?